Evansville, Indiana, a city on the river built on grit and change. But not every story from its past is found in the history books. Some linger in the shadows, tales of survival against impossible odds, like the story of a man known as Wildman Joe. His life started in chains. Born into slavery on a North Carolina plantation, he knew the harsh reality of being owned, of a future dictated by others. The Civil War ended that, freedom came, and Joe found a new life, on the water, working the steamboats on the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, from New Orleans all the way up to Evansville, the place he chose to call home after the war. A taste of independence, of making his own way. Then, disaster. A steamboat boiler exploded. A blinding flash, scalding steam, chaos. Joe survived the blast, but he was terribly burned, his entire body forever scarred. But Joe's story wasn't finished. Disfigured and struggling, he made his way back to Evansville, becoming a ragman, sifting through the discards of the city, a solitary figure carrying the visible weight of his past, a figure living on the fringes. You might think his story ends there, a life beaten down by unimaginable hardship. But Joe carried something inside him deeper than any scar, a refusal to be broken. And that same spirit that survived slavery and fire would propel him towards a chance encounter that led to a future no one could have imagined. You're listening to River City Mystery, and this is the story of Wildman Joe.
I see two horribly hideous-looking little dog-like creatures in this house.
It was a disembodied voice. It was like a little child trying to scare us.
I don't know what this was. I've heard everything you can think of. This was nothing I'm ever accustomed to, ever.
It was terrifying because it was like, there were so many people to where it was like, are we all seeing this?
So everybody is scared. The kids are crying. The women don't, June's about to lose it. And what are they to do? These things will not die.
Welcome to another episode of River City Mystery. I am your host, Matt Dyke. In this episode, we're going to look at how two incredibly different lives, shaped by vastly different worlds, collided right here in Evansville. It's a story about strange twists of fate and the power of just keeping on. Our tale doesn't begin in Evansville, not initially. We start with Jeremiah Kohler. Old Doc Kohler, as he was widely known in the circus world, was a character as colorful and unconventional as the sideshows he ran. Before he became a traveling showman, Kohler had a different life, one rooted in the bustling, sometimes rough and tumble streets of St. Louis, Missouri. There, he was a wealthy saloon keeper, running a flourishing establishment. And it seems Kohler's life in St. Louis wasn't without its problems. He became entangled in serious legal troubles, specifically a robbery case involving a mail carrier. While the evidence didn't suggest Kohler physically participated in the robbery itself, he was implicated and eventually convicted of complicity. The prosecution argued that the proceeds from the robbery were divided at his saloon and that Kohler was aware of what had transpired. This conviction led to a sentence of 5 years in the state pen. Beyond the world of saloons and courtrooms, Jerry Kohler had a passion for the peculiar, a knack for finding and presenting the extraordinary to a curious public. This led him into the realm of sideshows, and most famously in his early career, to his celebrated flea circus. Yes, a flea circus. Kohler staged his flea exhibit under strong magnifying glasses, allowing audiences to marvel at the incredible feats performed by his tiny troupe of fleas. These weren't just random insect movements either. Kohler's fleas were trained. They pulled miniature chariots made of gold and platinum, crafted by a jeweler, rode in them, performed on tiny aerial rings, and even went through wedding ceremonies. Kohler, the barker, would regale audiences with entertaining tales of how he acquired and trained these intelligent insects, claiming he had imported 50 fleas from Berlin because only German fleas had the necessary intelligence. He described the tedious process of training, keeping them swaddled and handling them with tweezers, allowing them to feed for just 5 minutes at a time on his own arm. Kohler's act was so convincing he even got hauled into court once by a rival who accused him of stealing a star performer, a royal-blooded flea named Prince Henry, supposedly the only one of its kind to juggle. This led to a truly unusual court appearance where Kohler had to defend himself by bringing his entire flea circus before the judge. He had to prove to the judge that Prince Henry wasn't the only flea that could juggle. In a scene straight out of a sideshow tent, the court peered through magnifying glasses as Kohler's fleas impressively demonstrated their juggling skills, proving his innocence and securing his release. However, just when it seemed that Doc had won the strangest legal battle in the world, tragedy struck his tiny performers. A sudden pestilence swept through his collection overnight, tragically killing every one of the trained fleas, bringing the curtain down permanently on Doc Kohler's renowned flea circus. The show was over. But Doc Kohler, he was just getting started. Oh, and if you're wondering if he actually did steal Prince Henry, he later admitted that he did. Now, let's turn to the other life in our story, one that began in a place and circumstance starkly different from St. Louis saloons and flea circuses. This is the life of Joe Rettig. Joe was born into slavery on a plantation in North Carolina. His early years were defined by a life of forced labor, deprivation, and the constant threat of violence and family separation. It was an existence designed to strip away identity and hope. Yet, Joe endured. The end of the Civil War brought a seismic shift, offering the promise of freedom and self-determination. Like hundreds of thousands of formerly enslaved people, Joe left the South, seeking opportunity and safety in the North. His journey brought him to Evansville, a growing city in the Ohio River. Here, he found work on the steamboats that were the lifeblood of commerce and travel in the region. This was a step towards independence, a chance to earn a wage and build a new life. But the rivers, while offering opportunity, were also fraught with danger. Steamboat travel in the 19th century was perilous, and boiler explosions were terrifyingly common occurrences. Joe was aboard one such steamboat when disaster struck. The boiler exploded in a violent, scalding blast. Joe survived, but the explosion left him horribly and permanently scarred. His face and body were severely burned, leaving disfiguring marks. The black skin on parts of his body was burned away, healing into a reddish-white, scaled surface. Bearing these severe and very visible scars, Joe returned to the familiar streets of Evansville. In the years that followed, he made his living as a ragman. This meant sifting through the city's garbage, collecting discarded items like paper, rags, scrap metal, anything that could be sold for a few pennies to survive. It was a life on the margins, a difficult, often solitary existence, marked by poverty and the stares that his disfigurement likely attracted in a society that often shunned those who looked different. His life seemed defined by survival, hardship, and living in the shadows. And this is where the universe, in its mysterious and often unbelievable way, brought these two incredibly different lives together. Jerry, old Doc Kohler, the showman with a past of St. Louis saloons, legal battles, and a deceased flea circus, found himself in Evansville, and he spotted none other than Joe Rettig, the ragman, the survivor of slavery and a horrific steamboat explosion, whose body bore the undeniable dramatic evidence of his past. Kohler saw Joe not just as a man, though, but as a potential attraction. He saw the scars, the unusual appearance left by the burns, and immediately conceived of his next exhibit, a wild man captured from the west coast of the Philippines. It was a classic sideshow trope, playing on the audience fascination with the exotic and the savage. Kohler approached Joe with an offer. And just imagine that conversation. You've got like this seasoned showman, smooth talking, presenting a life dramatically different from sifting through trash. An offer to leave behind the alleys and step onto a stage. An offer to turn the very disfigurement that marked him as an outcast into the source of his livelihood. Joe Rettig accepted. And so Joe Rettig, the ragman, was transformed into Wildman Joe. The act was a complete fabrication, a performance designed purely for sensationalism. But Joe's physical appearance, a result of actual trauma, gave it a disturbing authenticity. For the role, Joe's head was often shaved, leaving only a small tuft of hair standing up right over his forehead. He wore large rings in his ears and nose, and a minimal, sometimes described as scant or grassy, costume. His skin was sometimes smeared with many colors of paint to enhance the savage look. Old Doc Kohler and the other barkers would deliver elaborate, often outlandish spiels to the waiting crowds outside the tent. They claimed Wildman Joe was a ferocious savage, captured by explorers in remote jungles. from the west coast of the Philippines to the wilds of Borneo or Madagascar. They'd spin tales of him being acquired at a very high price from the Smithsonian Institution, claiming he thirsted for human blood and lived on raw meat. Inside the tent, Joe would be presented in a pit or behind bars, often chained hand and foot for the audience's perceived safety. Joe's performance involved acting the part of the savage captive. He would snarl, growl, and roar, sounds that Kohler noted sent a shiver through many in the audience. He would eat raw meat poked through the bars with a pitchfork. Kohler candidly admitted that they often gave Joe bad whiskey because it made him actually wild. When the whiskey made him sleepy and less performative, they would sometimes prod him with pitchforks to get him to act up. Kohler recounted with amusement how audiences would cringe and turn pale, honestly fearing Joe might break his chains and attack them. It was a performance built on exploitation, fear, and a completely fabricated narrative using Joe's real scars as the primary authenticating element. But despite the ethically questionable nature of the act, joining the circus changed the trajectory of Joe's life dramatically. He didn't just perform for Doc Kohler briefly. Joe Rettig became a professional sideshow performer, known as Wildman Joe, for many years. He traveled with various circuses, leaving behind the life of a ragman when the show called. He joined circuses season after season, earning a salary that, while perhaps not large, one report mentions $25 a week at the time, which is about $800 in today's dollars. Not bad. It was a consistent income compared to the uncertainty of collecting scraps. Joe's career took him far. He performed for prominent circus owners. His travels as Wildman Joe even took him across international borders. He performed for a circus in Canada, standing before massive audiences. Imagine that, a man born into the utter powerlessness of slavery in the American South, surviving a horrific accident that left him disfigured, scraping by as a ragman, eventually finding himself on a stage before 30,000 people in another country. The story of Joe Rettig, Wildman Joe, is undoubtedly difficult. It forces us to confront the harsh realities of post-Civil War life for African Americans. Yet beneath the layers of hardship and problematic nature of his act lies a story of astounding resilience. Consider the path Joe walked, from the chains of slavery where his very identity was denied, through the sudden trauma of a steamboat explosion that left him scarred for life, to the difficult anonymous existence as a ragman scraping by to survive. Any one of these challenges could break a normal person, but Joe, he endured. And when a bizarre, unexpected opportunity arose, born from a chance encounter with a showman whose own life was a series of unpredictable turns, Joe took it. He leveraged his very scars into a means of survival. He stepped out of the shadows and onto the stage, performing for thousands. His journey is a powerful illustration of how the human spirit can find a way to persist, to adapt, and even find success in the face of unimaginable adversity. From the confines of a plantation to the spectacle of the sideshow, Joe Rettig's life is a testament to an unbreakable will, a man who, against all odds, never gave up. And as far as what became of Joe Rettig, Wildman Joe, there are no records that I could find that show what became of him. If you have any information, feel free to share on my Discord at rivercitymystery.com/discord, or you can just contact me at rivercitymystery.com/contact. I'd love to hear what information you have. And old Doc Kohler, he passed away in February of 1919. An article written at the time says that he was buried at the Oak Hill Cemetery in Evansville. The article states that he left no relatives, but a host of friends made by cheerful disposition. Doc Kohler could laugh the heartiest when his pockets were empty and a feed seemed the remotest possibility. The article says that the old circus man was 56 years old and prior to his circus days ran one of the biggest and most flourishing saloons in St. Louis. At one time he was wealthy, he died penniless. And that brings this episode to a close. I hope you enjoyed listening to the story of Wildman Joe. Until next time, take care.